All right, so let's begin with what issues we've been seeing in employment law since corona outbreak, and especially this week. Some of these issues come up, but they're just coming up in this context. Others aren't covered by laws, and so we've been scratching our head. Thankfully, new laws have come down. They address some of the issues, but not all of them. There's still a lot of gaps in the law. But I guess the point of this video is to lay out what can be going wrong, to explain, one, what the people are going through, and two, what you should be aware of. Needless to say that this week the consultation calls that we get have been so panicked. People are afraid to lose their job. People are afraid to be not to be able to pay their rent, and people are just afraid of what this is bringing for them and their families. So a lot of these have been maybe therapy sessions. There's just a lot of fear. So I hope with some information and understanding of this and seeing how the government is stepping up, we can demystify some of these fears. And it either is or isn't, and this is what you're gonna do. So let's hope this helps a little bit. So mainly the calls have been about being laid off, being sick, being afraid of going to work, not to get corona obviously, and being in quarantine. So when it comes to being laid off, is that legal under the laws right now because of corona? It is. So you absolutely may be laid off. Some people have already been laid off, and that's totally understandable if an employer doesn't have enough demand and has to cut force, right? However, what isn't allowed is to lay people off for the wrong reasons. And unfortunately, we've been seeing discrimination and prejudice raise its ugly head in this scenario. So yes, they must cut people, but what is the criteria they're using? So for example, they're saying we need to cut 20% of force. Let's eliminate this department or non-essential duties of the company. That's okay. That's totally legal. And for some people that will suck. What isn't legal though is to say, let's get rid of 20% of the force, and the first to go are Italians because they're contagious, right? Legitimately, that happened this week. In one of the calls. That wasn't the nation, but it was pretty close. The same thing as you've seen in the news, I haven't encountered yet, but let's say if they decide to eliminate all positions that have Asian or Chinese people for the same prejudices, right? Because certain heads of state refer it as Chinese flu or whatever it is, So that's very dangerous rhetoric, and obviously that could factor into decisions. Additionally, what could be happening is if an employer is looking at how to cut benefits that they will have to provide under the new laws, they may pick to get rid of the older or the sicker or pregnant people, because they're thinking oh my God, what if I'm on the hook for these new benefits that I have to provide for them for a certain amount of time, and they're more likely to be sick, so let me get rid of them, right? And right now we know, even though it seems like young people are getting sick too, but we know that older people are maybe more at risk. So I could see how some employer could want to eliminate those positions in order not to have an employee that doesn't just get the sniffles from corona and recovers in 2 weeks, but maybe is hospitalized for 3 months, and the employer will have to pay for some of the benefits, right? So just be vigilant. If you're the only person in your company that's getting eliminated for what seems to be an unfair reason, just make sure you're aware of the categories and who else they're firing. And if it seems like pretext, get a consultation with an attorney. Again, about layoffs, another point is the new New York state law that was passed this week, which I'll discuss in a separate video, it backdates to January 1st, 2020, when Corona started. Some people, and it's very narrow, however, it seems to me the way I read it, that some people that were laid off in the area of quarantine, so New Rochelle or Westchester, where there were official orders of quarantine of companies and of the whole area, but I'm sure companies too. If you were laid off during that time, you may either get benefits or be reinstated, because now being fired during official quarantine is actually protected, and it seems like the law is retroactive. So please stay tuned. I think there's something there if you're among those people. In terms of layoffs, also be vigilant. It's like a little bit of tangent, but I put it here. Some employers, to avoid, again, I think, having more liability, have been trying to get people to sign some sort of agreement, a little bit of severance right now, or contract saying they're an independent contractor. So in case when an employee is laid off or is or is fired or whatever, is sick, they don't have to pay the benefits. And the reason is this: if you're an employee, you get more rights. If you're an independent contractor, freelancer, not so much. Of course, and this is very important to know, no matter what you sign, whether you're an independent contractor or an employee or independent contractor rather, it will matter on the duties that you had and the employee-employer relationship. So it's different in a state and federal law. The test, I won't bore you with it, is a separate subject. But basically, if your employer controls your schedule and you only work for them, and you basically are their employee, you're their employee, even if you sign some sort of contract that says you are a contractor. But still, it could be a disputed point. Now, what if you were laid off and everything was correct? Like the company truly is struggling, they did the right thing, they can't support all employees. You should apply for unemployment, most likely. Again, I don't know all of you, this is not a legal consultation, right? This is just general overview, but for most people, I think it'll work, unless you have some other benefits or something else that may change this for you. But for most people in New York State now that will be laid off, you should apply for unemployment benefits. Unemployment benefits are now available without the 7-day waiting period. So Department of Labor, I believe, lifted that. Usually there's a 7-day waiting period. Now there isn't. Generally speaking, and I'm not unemployment benefits is completely different than what I do, but generally speaking, the sooner you apply, the better it is, because the way they calculate employment benefits, like the Employment Benefit Office, they take how much you made closest to the time when you were working. So the longer you wait, you can either become ineligible, or you can get fewer payments, or your payments will be less. And also, I think in unemployment benefits, there are some laws that, and don't quote me on this, but that say that you can't get retroactive pay, and there's a certain period. So regardless, if you're laid off and have other considerations, go apply. You can do it online. That's the way to go if you're laid off. Now, what to do if you are sick? So the problem with this virus, of course, we still can't test for it fully. And, sorry, my phone almost died. Guys, as I'm sitting here by my outlet and charging my phone, I realized I should have said one more thing. If you are sick with coronavirus or you're quarantined for coronavirus, you cannot be fired for that. That would be illegal. So they can't be you're out now. That is totally illegal. I'm not saying that can't actually happen, but if it happened, it means that you have a case against your employer. So just be on a lookout for that. While you have coronavirus, your job should be protected. And also, look, this is my quarantine buddy. Nitsa? Cutie. My quarantine buddy. All right, I'm back. Phone is charged. So let's do this. What happens if you're sick? So what happens if you're home and you are sick? It depends on what is your diagnosis, right? Have you been diagnosed with coronavirus? If so, much easier. You will probably be covered either by old laws or the new laws that were passed this week, which means that your job will be safe. You will get some sort of benefit. Now, what if you're in quarantine? The problem, or self-quarantined, or you're suspecting coronavirus, but you don't know. which is the big problem with this virus, right? It's asymptomatic. It looks like another cold. People don't know. And frankly speaking, tests aren't really available, right? In that case, you could use your New York State days, 5 sick paid days to get tested, to try to get diagnosed. And I will talk about in the video about New York, about the new laws that were passed this week. But I believe if you can get a note from a medical professional saying you should stay in quarantine for this, you should be safe. Now, none of these issues even arise if your employer is taking this seriously and if they are if they're not challenging you, so if your employer is like, please stay home, you're fine, probably is fine. Of course, they can like do the switcheroo and then, do something crazy, but I think, hopefully, better where you work and it'll be fine. So basically, if you're sick, it depends on how this is happening. The next scenario we've been getting a lot of calls about is people afraid to go to work. They're afraid to commute and they're afraid to get sick and they're afraid to get to work. This is perhaps the most worrying area of law that is almost certainly not covered by previous laws that didn't deal with pandemics. And from what I read today, I don't think they're covered by today's laws, because if they were, there would be a provision that says if you have a reasonable belief, you may get exposed to coronavirus at work, you don't have to go. So I didn't see that provision. So it seems to me that if you're just afraid of the general situation and you think you rather not go, that if you don't show up, you could be fired, and that could be okay. Now, this is such a gray area, and I'm sure as the situation goes on, so today is March 20th, but like literally tomorrow it can change, right? And the way we interpret laws can change. Not only this, but the state and federal laws that have been passed this week, there will be regulations issued to interpret those laws. So any day this could change, right? So please stay posted on those. I will continue to try to update you, but with or without me, please stay posted, because maybe in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, this will be a reasonable fear, and the pandemic would have gone so far that having this fear would be fine. And also, if you have someone at work like Judy next to your desk was coughing all the time last week, and now Judy is gone, you have a reasonable belief that she was sick and your employer is hiding it, and you refuse to go to work, please watch my whistleblower video, because I think you could have a whistleblower claim if you complain about public danger in the place of employment. So please watch that. What to do if you're quarantined. Now, let's break it down. What does that mean? You could be in an area of New York State, and this is only New York law, that's been quarantined, like I think Westchester, New Rochelle, can't leave the house. You could be at a place, you could be in a type of job that's been, let's say, quarantined, but like shut down, like bars and restaurants, some schools. I think as I'm making this video, they just said non-essential jobs have to stay home. So that's like a type of quarantine, right? Or you could be self-quarantined. So if you're quarantined by the state or the government, then the new laws that I will discuss in my next video apply to you, and they offer you job protection, right? So if you're quarantined and your employer is like, you didn't show up to work in Manhattan, your job would have been protected and firing you is illegal. So you would have had a claim if that happened. If you are in a job that's been shut down, like restaurants, I believe from the reading of the law that you also would have job protection. Now, if you are self-quarantined at home, I think you would also fall into the new disability laws, or at least the old ones. So for quarantine, it mostly is good. The part where it gets interesting is, what if you self-quarantine because you believe you had exposure, but your employer is like, this is bogus, coronavirus isn't happening, and I need you at work, right? And let's say you can't get medical testing. You aren't able to confirm whether you do or do not have it, right? That's where it gets into a gray area. I mean, first of all of this video is not legal advice, but for sure call an employment lawyer to talk about your rights. That's all she wrote for this video, but please watch my next video for more content.